Hey guys, this is Echo Soundworks, and you're checking out a production tip and trick tutorial video. So this is the second and final video in support of our newest sound set, Chainsmoking Volume 1. And if you don't have any interest in that sound set, doesn't matter, you're still going to get some cool tips and tricks from this video. Now in this video, we'll be checking out how you can pull off a Chainsmokers style track. And we're going to be looking at arrangement as well as like mixing drums, that sort of stuff. So you might be asking, well, why would you want to do that? Well, of course, you don't want to copy the Chainsmokers too closely because they already exist and you won't have your own sound. You probably won't stand out, etc., etc. But the Chainsmokers did something interesting. They borrowed from pop. Their last 4 or 5 songs are just pretty much, some people will call them straight pop. Some people will describe them as being pop EDM. They take a lot of ideas from pop production and blending those with genres of EDM, whether it's future bass, trap, whatever, can have a really cool result and add some freshness to your tracks. So with that being said, let's dive right in. All right, so we're going to check out this track that I have put together for this video. Now, I made this track more Chainsmoker kind of leaning than I'd want to if I was going to release it, but it's not completely done. It's probably like 75-80% of the way there in sections like the intro, verse, pre-chorus, that sort of stuff. And that's how I actually intended it to be because it's going to be better for you guys to see this stuff as it's being written, as it's being produced, and kind of seeing that process as opposed to just being like, here's how it is and here's what I did. So with that being said, let's check out this track. All right, so let's talk about how you can get into that Chainsmokers style world. First thing you want to be aware of is your BPM and your keys. So the BPM, it has a wide range. If we're just looking at the Chainsmokers' most successful tracks, which should definitely be Roses, Don't Let Me Down, Closer, All We Know, maybe to a lesser extent Paris, but I know a lot of people don't like Paris. They're all in a pop tempo, maybe except for Don't Let Me Down. Pop tempos are anything from like 90, 95, 100, 105, 110, 115. I know Roses and Closer are in those tempo ranges, those BPM. Now, those are typically pop tempos, right? So that's one reason why, if you guys remember when Roses came out, it was such a BFD. It was because it was so different. It was like slowed down future bassy pop. And it was just fresh sounding, right? So now it's been overplayed for sure. But it's the idea of kind of switching up tempos. So that in and of itself is an interesting idea that if you guys are like, well, crap, I don't want to sound like the Chainsmokers, just maybe if you're a trap producer, maybe if you're future bass, maybe if you're dubstep, maybe try slowing down, speeding up the tempo, and see what happens in terms of feeling. You might get some really cool and interesting results. That's what most likely happened with the Chainsmokers when they were working on Roses. Now, keys. Most of these, because they're going to be pop songs, they're not too hard and they're not too sad sounding. They're kind of in between. They kind of find this good middle ground where it's either happy sounding or uplifting or maybe a little bit powerful, but it's typically not like a sad ballad style. So You can definitely get away using, typical chords, minor chords, major chords. You can also get away using seventh chords, suspended chords. I know the Chainsmokers do a lot of interesting inversions and use a lot of suspended ninth, seventh chords, that sort of stuff. So if you're trying to get that sound, probably get a little bit closer to it if you're using those chords as opposed to just basic triads. All right, so this next one's a little bit of a joke, kind of tongue-in-cheek, but use finger snaps. Chainsmokers use snaps in their verses and pre-chorus sections a lot, and then they might open up into a full snare in the drop. Sometimes they haven't. So in this track, I used a snap. I even filtered out some of the high frequencies on the snap, so there it is without the EQ. Now, if you're like, why the hell do I want to sound that much like the Chainsmokers? Well, the Chainsmokers, A, didn't invent that idea of using finger snaps in the verse, and B, the idea is actually a sound idea, especially when you're trying to do like a fusion-oriented thing like bring pop over into EDM. And that's this idea of use a smaller percussive sound, whether it's a snap or a clap, in your verse. So a snap smaller than a clap, typically, and a clap is smaller than a snare, and then maybe open it up in the chorus or, in full sections of your track. Let's talk about kick drums now. A lot of the Chainsmokers kick progressions, they're simple and straightforward, but they also introduce a little bit of a groove, right? Not a lot of their tracks have been 4 on the floor. Well, the ones that we're referencing with Don't Let Me Down, Closer, All We Know, and Roses, and even Paris. So some of their older tracks I know are 4 on the floor, but if you're trying to get that pop crossover, you want it to have a little bit of a groove, a little bit of a vibe. Can't be too fast, can't be too slow type thing. So the kick pattern in this section of the track, which is the pre-chorus, is pretty basic. Like, it's not going to blow anyone's minds. But it's simple and straightforward. There's a certain element of the Chainsmokers sound that is achieved from simplicity. Now, that gives you room to grow into maybe the chorus or your drop. Now, the kick pattern, and I'll color this track, so the kick is right here in the pre-chorus, and the kick is right there in the chorus section, and I'll make those, this pink color one out. So this section, you can see there's a lot more kicks. Now, that might not stick if I was going to actually turn this into a song that I was going to release, but I might have, I'm pretty sure, I'm like 99% sure, I would have more kick hits in the chorus section than the verse. But this gets the song moving. If I was going to send this out to a vocalist, I would want them to know that this is for sure a different section of the song. So get bigger, do something different, and you can achieve that by changing up your kick pattern. But for the most part, you want space. Now, there's going to be some space in between these hits, and when you get to the drop, there's going to be even more space. So let me go down to my drums track stack here for the drop, and we'll highlight this and solo it. So here's the kick. Right, there's a lot of space. Let's bring in the snares with that. The reason there's so much space is because in a drop, in a Chainsmokers style drop, you're typically going to have some chord sounds, a bass, and then a lead. Now, if you had kicks going everywhere, it'd be kind of hard to accent those, and you also want to create a little bit of a groove playing off of your kick. So with this lead here, I'll just solo part of it and solo the kick and snare. You can hear that the lead is kind of in the pocket of that kick, right? So the kick happens on 1. This doesn't happen right on 1. Right? The second kick happens right off of where it typically happened, right there. And you can see that on this lead, there's nothing there. So it's kind of a nice way to kind of play around and get your lead not to always be fighting with your kick and your snare in that essence. Now, your snare is always going to be pretty much in the same spot in this style track. But you can see in here in these first, 4 or 5 notes on my lead, it's not hitting with a kick, right? So let's go over here. Again, so the first 3 kick hits, the lead is not competing with it. Let's check if the 4th one is. 4th one isn't, it's on the decay. I think on the 5th one it is right here. So if we go up to the kick, we have right here. Nope, it's not. So literally the lead is pretty much always off of the kick, and it adds this nice bounce to the track. The Chainsmokers have done this and play with this a little. This is probably a more extreme demo of that, but you should get the idea. So let's talk about arrangement. The tracks of the Chainsmokers that we've been referencing throughout this video, they're definitely heavily influenced in pop. Now, pop is usually this format: intro, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, and then wash, rinse, and repeat. If you're an EDM guy, you might be more familiar with intro, verse, build up, breakdown, drop, or breakdown, build up, drop, depending on the genre. And sometimes you'll work in, 32 bars, 16 bars, that sort of stuff. Well, the Chainsmokers, because it's relying heavily on pop influences, their tracks, especially the ones we reference, they work in chunks of 8 typically. So every 8 bars. And that's a pop production technique. It's called the rule of 8, where every 8 bars, something changes or it's a new section. So your verse is maybe 8 bars, your pre-chorus is 8 bars, your chorus is 8 bars, etc. It makes everything really accessible, really kind of easy for the listener. And I know a lot of people might think that that's, formulating music too much. And I agree on a certain level, but that's that sound that they're doing. So the intro in this track is not 8 bars. That's the exception. Intros and maybe like bridges and maybe transitions, that sort of thing. So this is just 4 bars and it's about 5 to 9 seconds. You don't typically want your intro being more than 10 seconds if you're going for that pop crossover appeal. Now, the verse is 8 bars, and that's this purple section here. Now, within each 8 bars, you can introduce new elements. For instance, the first half of this doesn't have the kick. It just has the 2 instruments and then the snap. I introduced the kick, which is this pink track right here, halfway through. Now, it just feels like it's ready for change, right? And there's a little bit of a transition. Now, here's a pre-chorus. Okay, so guitar stayed the same, but it sounds bigger, and it's bigger for 2 reasons. The ear's being tricked because I'm adding new instruments, more frequencies, and it's mixed a little bit to be a little bit louder, a little bit bigger in terms of frequency. So let me tell you what I mean by that. So first, I add the bass. It's a pretty basic bass, right? It's just a synth bass, but it adds a nice vibe. Second, I add these chords from Serum. The patch is called Escapism, and I filtered out the high frequencies. Right? I don't want to let too many high frequencies in because I still want my chorus section to be bigger than my pre-chorus. I want my drop to be bigger than my chorus. I want to kind of trick the listener into that. Okay, so that's what's happening, right? Now the ARP remained the same. So I add 2 new instruments, and then what I did was I duplicated my snap track and I let in more high frequency, just a little bit. It's not completely open, but it's letting in more high frequency than in the first 8 of the verse. Okay, now this is the exact same for the second half of the 8. Now, I don't have all the fills and transitions done here, but I probably need a drum fill. Right? There's my terrible beatboxing. This is the chorus. Okay, now we already looked at this in terms of the kick drum. There's more going on, but there's also more going on with the frequency. I let in more high frequency with this kick than I do in the kick that's in the verse and the pre-chorus. I'm letting in almost all the high frequencies on this snap. Listen to this. Hear that? So that's giving the illusion that the track, it actually is, but it's making it sound bigger and like it's opening up. Now, I did add one more instrument in this section, and this is pluck, but it's filtered out and quite low in the mix. I could mute that, and it would still sound bigger than the pre-chorus because of the kicks. And the hi-hat, right? So it sounds bigger. I don't know if I need that pluck. I typically always err on the side of adding more than I need and then scaling it back once I have a vocalist. So the build of this style of track is a lot more, I would say, dialed back into the mix than certain genres of EDM. You want it to kind of accent the movement of your 8 bars going into your drop, but it shouldn't be like in certain genres of EDM, especially a couple of years ago, even just like 2 years ago, really, the buildup was like one of the big sections of the track. So this one, the buildup happens on the back half of the chorus section. It's just a couple snares, claps, and a really quiet riser. And then a fill, okay? Now, speaking of that, bar 29, we have this 1 bar kind of transition section. The Chainsmokers have used, I think it was in All We Know, it just went whoosh, that type of thing. I'm just using like a little sub drop down. The pitch is just gliding down. Now, there's a reason why I'm doing that. So part of the balance between getting this track to sound like a Chainsmokers track or pop, EDM, whatever you want to call it, is riding the fine line of the rule of 8, but also allowing it to still grow. So I want the drop to sound bigger than the chorus section. Now it's going to be harder when I have vocals. Right now it sounds a lot bigger because it's louder. Because there's a lead right up front of the mix. Now right here there's not. There, in that space in the mix, there would, in theory, be a vocalist, right? So these two sections now would sound pretty much the same in terms of big factor with your lead and how it's sitting in the mix. Having this one bar section where everything just goes away kind of cleanses the ear's palate. So the drop is quite simple. Basically, all I did was I took the chords that I was using in the verse here, like with this pluck, and I played those similar chords, changed the pattern just a little, but I'm playing it with a chord layer, these 3 chord instruments. Right, they have more frequency. There's more highs. I carved out the lows to fit the bass, but they're bigger sounding to the ear. And then I'm just layering those with a lead. Now the lead, Chainsmokers use synths maybe layered with a vocal sound, vocal chop, that sort of stuff. This one's coming from a combination of a Voxa as well as a serum patch in Chainsmoking. But let's listen to it with just the bass and the drums and the vocal. Right, so the chords are really important in this to make it sound full and big. All right, so I know a lot of you guys will probably be curious about the chords. These chords are included as MIDI files in the pack, so if you want to learn from them, you could. But for those of you who don't have any interest in getting a pack, they're just not basic triads, right? So if I play this chord progression with basic triads, it just doesn't have that sound, right? And if I play it more with chords that I used in the actual track, it's basically 9th, 11th chords, a little bit, maybe I think there's a minor 7th chord in there as well, with inversions. So just stay away from the cookie cutter triads and you'll get more of that Chainsmokers pop sound. And it'll just be more of an interesting chord sound in general. So guys, I'm gonna end this video now. It's getting close to 20 minutes. I didn't wanna go over 20 minutes. I talked a little bit quick, but I wanted to cover as much information as possible in as short of time as humanly possible for me. So if you guys have any questions or comments, let me know below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I am Echo Soundworks. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.